all the experience that I've had now with my podcast actually is part of what led me to my full-time job now with the podcast guys, because what I'm doing is going beyond just getting that final product. Now I'm part of podcast development. I'm in the
Yeah.
room at the beginning of the conversation, and I'm working with these brands to figure out what the best concept is for them, what's going to get them to their goals. And that, of course, doesn't mean just large download numbers. That goal could be very different depending on the
Yeah.
client. But I actually get to have a hand in the beginning, and we can set the show up for that marketing success.
Welcome to PodBiz, the money behind the mic, where we get into the business of podcasting. I'm Norma Jean Belenke, a podcast and media strategist, specializing in marketing and audience development.
And I'm John Kiernan. I'm a podcast producer, and we're asking the question that's on everyone's mind. Where is the money in podcasting?
Each week, we talk to podcast industry professionals, marketers, and creators who are turning podcasts into a thriving business and making the industry what it is today.
With real revenue, real strategies, and real results.
If you're looking to grow or scale your show, and of course monetize, you're in the right place.
So let's get down to PodBiz.
Today we're joined by Catrin Skaperdas, Marketing and Audience Development Director for the Podcast Guys. Today we're going to be speaking about audience development and how it relates to where the money is for your podcast, how your audience is your greatest asset, how Catrin's built her career, how you can build your audience, whether you are an indie who's doing everything yourself and feeling overwhelmed, or you're a brand and you have major budget, her own podcast, how she built that, Italian for sure, as well as what she's excited about coming up within the podcasting industry. Let's get down to PodBiz. Catrin, how's it going?
It's going well, Norma. Thanks so much for having me on PodBiz.
Absolutely. We are thrilled you're here. So let's get straight into it. Catrin, where is the money in podcasting?
Well, the money in podcasting is not in one place. I say the money can be found when you use your podcast as part of a brand ecosystem. So I'm really talking more to indie podcasts or startup podcasts that don't have a big company backing them or a huge budget.
Yeah.
A lot of podcasts rely on selling ads into their show, but there's so much more that you can do, and a lot of companies that help you sell ads into your show don't actually help you until you have about 10 or 20K per month downloads, but there's so many listens then going unmonetized. So when you create your own sort of ecosystem, you can sell to your listeners in unique ways. You can create digital products. You can sell merch. I mean, even Alex Cooper from Call Her Daddy is selling, sweatsuits and drinks. And of course, now she has a media agency and network and a creative agency, etc. But going beyond just selling ads into your show can really help you make money from your podcast. And thinking outside of the box, I mean, things like, can you host an in-person event that relates to the theme of your show? Can you host a paid webinar that offers more value than your show gives out for free? I've worked with clients that crowdfunded some episodes. So that's a way that you can have money kind of coming in so that you can continue making your podcast. Of course, we know of things like Patreon. So if you want to create a community around your podcast, now there's also the Stan storefront. So you can put things behind a paywall in your Stan store. So things like a course, of course, a community, as I mentioned, any sort of digital product, that can all be in your Stan store. But the idea is that if you have podcast listeners and a community that's willing to engage with you for, say 45 minutes a week as an example, you likely can get them to purchase something that you're able to sell to them and offer value to them, and they'll pay for it.
Absolutely. That's a great point. I mean, I think on the indie side, we've definitely had a bunch of guests here on PodBiz speak to this. Like, unfortunately, the money isn't in one giant pile. There's not a specific button you can press and dive into a giant room full of money like Scrooge McDuck. That being said, there is so much opportunity. You just have to really apply it to your show specifically. What is your show about? Where does your audience hang out? What are they interested in buying? How do they want to support you?
Yeah,
I think
absolutely.
those are all really great questions on the indie side. And we both work in audience development. So if you have questions, you could reach out to both of us individually. But Catrin, you also work with the podcast guys. And so you're working on a lot of bigger projects, branded things, really interesting work. So on the larger side of the bell curve, right, on that kind of more downloads, fewer shows side of the spectrum, what does audience development look like when you have got money to spend?
There's a lot of places you can advertise your podcast, and being in places where podcast listeners are is still going to be the number one way to promote your show. We see that organically with things like cross promotion, but if you don't have enough impressions to set up those cross promotions or you want to get on a larger show, you can actually pay to have that show advertise your show. There's tools also like Podroll where you can pay to have feed drops put into other podcasts. There's ways where you can pay podcast apps to promote your show, like Player FM offers this, or Castbox offers this. There's Spotify ads where you can run ads when people are listening to podcasts and music, where they can hear the ad for your podcast. And so it's still the traditional way of putting your podcast in front of potential podcast listeners where they're already listening. Of course, there's also social media ads, which can help support this. But at, with the work that I do, I've always seen the most results come from getting the show out in front of podcast listeners. And so if there's budget to help you do that, that's a great way to spend budget.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, basically the answer is you're doing the same as the indie creators. You're just able to pay to get that podcast in front of more listeners.
Absolutely. I mean, and
Yeah.
with branded podcasts, what's interesting is that a lot of them will have the brands will have the money to pay for the curation of the show. And sometimes the marketing gets put aside. And so they don't realize that the budget for marketing the show is actually just as important. So then we have to
Yeah.
find ways, if there's not a large budget, because they've used the budget to actually create the show, how can they grow the
Yeah.
show even with a modest budget, even if they're a very large brand? And then there's ways, of course, like tapping into their own channels that they already have and teaching them how to use them effectively. Because this is something that, I was going to mention before when we were talking about where's the money in podcasting and asking podcast listeners to take action, such as signing up for a Patreon. You never want to over ask anybody to do anything. So that goes for podcast listeners. You don't want to say, leave me a review and follow me on all social media accounts and subscribe to my newsletter and do XYZ unless you are offering additional independent and unique value in all of those places. Don't request that from all the podcast listeners that you have. And then
Yeah,
the same
absolutely.
the
Yeah,
same goes yeah.
yeah, no, I was just going to say, I mean, I think what you said is really important. First of all, I just want to jump in here and talk about budget. So, if you are a brand, please know that you should have a marketing budget that is comparable to your production budget. From two audience dev girlies, we recommend it. It's very important. I think also sometimes I've definitely encountered this with clients, especially bigger, high profile brands where, okay, they put so much energy into building a beautiful show, right? Beautiful narrative arc, sound design, blah, blah, blah. And then when it comes to promotion, they're like, oh, we'll just put it out. And it's like, well, we could do some other stuff if we had budget. And so I do think it's a numbers game. And that being said, if you're an indie creator, you're going to do all those feed swaps yourself, right? You're going to contact all the podcasts that have similar audiences that you can build relationships with. But if you're a brand, you can absolutely hire us and other people to do that work. And so I think that that's really important. And it does require budget. If you are a big brand, I just want to also emphasize this, like, dear brands, give us budget.
Yeah, it absolutely does. But I think what I wanted to say too is that if brands don't have budget and they're going and using their own channels, or maybe they're doing some of both, because they should be. You should have
Mhm,
budget and then you should also be reaching your own channels already.
mhm,
One thing I see time and time again is the classic, hey, we have a podcast, go listen. And
mhm.
leading with value first is just something that I can say on repeat to every
Oh,
client
yeah.
multiple times. And it really needs to be said, because when you offer up value, people will tune in and they'll invest their time. But if you simply
Mhm.
say, listen, there's this new podcast, you should go check it out, people think that they're doing you almost a favor. Whereas if you offer the value, they want to come because they want to learn about whatever your show is about. So this comes up, and this comes up also organic and in paid campaigns.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's really important to showcase firsthand, right off the bat, why the listener is going to want to listen. Always be value first for the listener. Anything that you're sharing needs to be, hey, here's what we talked about and here's how it applies to you. Hey, here's what you're going to learn. Hey, here's what I didn't know and you might not know also. I think it's really important to always put the listener experience first. And this is come up a lot in PodBiz where we talk about, being in the spirit of service. And if you're a podcaster, you are in service of your audience all the time because they're going to tell you when they like stuff and when they don't. And they're going to do it through their listening behavior. They're going to do it through your consumption rates. So I think that that's a really big focus point as well. And just to go back to budgets, I also think that it's something where, if you're an industry friend who is listening or watching our PodBiz YouTube channel, it's something where when you are pitching, make sure that you include marketing budget in a pitch from the beginning, right? I think I can't speak for you, but maybe you can agree with this, where you've been in a position where the client comes to you and production's already started and you're like, okay, but wait, where's the marketing budget, right? And so I think it's almost like playing catch up. And so it is a really important consideration. And we're seeing lots of branded agencies, maybe the podcast guys, definitely a lot of branded agencies that are creating really big work. Make sure that they fold that in on the front end, that it's a consideration on the front end. When they're pitching clients, when you are pitching clients, make sure that you include what it actually costs to actively and appropriately promote this podcast to the audience you want to reach. I think that that's a really important distinction as well.
Absolutely. There's a balance between what are you going to do to take on this new client if they simply don't have that budget? Are you going to say no, that you won't take on the project? But
Yeah.
making the client aware that that is something that is quite important is definitely something that we do at the podcast guys. And then if it's a matter of not now but later, I run what I call podcast reviews every 3 to 4 months for our clients, and it gets brought up every single time and the things that we can do. And that's when you show them that it works. So I can pull from previous examples and other clients that I've done it for and say, look, these are the results. They're
Yep.
more willing to do it. And so that's how we get them to also convert and kind of spend more money there with marketing.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not one of those things where it's like a one and done or an either or, but it's something where, there's a lot of freelancers that listen to PodBiz. And so if you're out there and you're pitching work, make sure you include marketing. And it is something where, when your client starts to see results with their show or they want to see results they're not seeing, you could say, hey, here's a campaign we ran. Here are the results of it. Here's how many, new fans that you have for your show who are dedicated and die hard for this podcast and ultimately for your brand.
Yeah, absolutely. And you made a good point about, when you see those results, especially you said you have independent contractors that are listening to this. And if you're, say, a producer and you maybe can partner up with a marketer and, if that's not your area of expertise, because if the show is doing well, that client will continue to come back and keep producing that show.
Yes.
So it works.
Yes. Like results by future good work. I think that that's a really important distinction as well. And we both worked on the indie side and on the branded side. So it's definitely something where you see both sides of the coin, right? And you're someone who has applied a lot of your expertise to your own podcast as well. So obviously, PodBiz is my vertical with John Kiernan, and it's a podcast about podcasting, but your podcast is actually about Italian culture.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's about Italian culture, and the idea, my mission for the show, it's called Italian for Sure, is to spread accurate information about Italian culture around the world. There's a lot of misunderstandings between what is actually Italian American culture versus what is actually what is Italian culture. And so, being an American that lives in Italy, I'm noticing cultural differences that I noticed when I shared those with Italians and Americans. They would find them very interesting. And so, being on this mission, I've had the opportunity to speak to a lot of Italians about different things, hand gestures, of course, food, but also going beyond just stereotype conversations and talking about, what does mental health care look like in Italy, and some other things like purchasing real estate. If you're thinking about moving to Italy, that's going to be one of the topics in season 2 that's already recorded. So yeah, building my own podcast has given me a great broadening perspective for a podcast from start to finish. When I started my podcast, which is about a year ago now, I really was working with final products. I was getting handed a final product and said, okay, great, now make this big. And so I had to go out and do all this marketing with just what I was provided with. When
Yeah.
I started my own podcast, I really had a chance to experience what it's like to be a producer, a pre-producer, work in post-production. I'm doing everything from finding the guests to concept development to episode outline to actually recording. I would lug my old suitcase with broken wheels to different locations in Italy and bring
Yeah.
all of my equipment.
Katrin and I actually met for the first time in Rome, where she had
Yep.
lugged a giant suitcase full of microphone and recording equipment because she had an in-person interview. I have to say, I think it's been really cool to see how you have applied a lot of audience dev strategy from your career to Italian for Sure, which is your project. You're not creating it for a brand, you're not creating it for an agency, it's your baby. And so seeing you really work hard on it has been incredible in terms of applying a lot of the strategy of audience dev that you offer your clients to your own show. You've had a couple of clips go viral. We're talking over 1 million views on Instagram. You've had event collaborations. You did an in-person launch. I have to tell everyone, I attended the in-person launch in Milan. I am not that cool. I felt like it was almost too cool for me. It was in a subway station, in like a secret bar in a subway station in Milan with a DJ and natural wine. It was like the coolest Italian podcast launch moment. There were
Thank you.
stickers, there was Venki chocolate. It was phenomenal. And I have to say, like, I think when we look at your personal podcast, which is very separate from your career within the podcasting industry, you have created consistency across the brand, from the artwork which you had commissioned to the events that you've done, either collaborations with sponsors or your own launch, to your social strategy. It's really fun from an audience dev, like, nerd out standpoint, to see the principles of growth that you've applied to your own show.
I really appreciate that, Norma. Thank you. And I'm really glad that you were able to come to that party, despite the schedule change because of the rain.
Oh,
Remember?
yeah. No, it was great. I thought it was a public holiday. Wasn't it a public
It was
holiday?
a public holiday, and it was raining. I remember the
Oh
rain,
my God.
but yeah,
It was
it
a
was.
public holiday. I came up from Rome to Milan. For everyone listening, this is actually a hilarious story. I came up from Rome to Milan. I was like, okay, I'm going to get a little hotel. I've never been to Milan. I'm going to come to Katrin's launch. It'll be great. And Katrin, I'm like, hey, Katrin, I've arrived. I'm in Milan. Buongiorno. And Katrin's like, hey, so it's actually not tonight.
It's tomorrow, which I
Right,
just got news of.
yeah, which is a very Italian thing, right? It's something
Yes.
where the venue won't let you know, and then you have to pivot at the last minute, and everybody still comes and has a great time, and the vibe is there. And I think that's, a very big cultural difference as well, right? If that had happened in the States, everybody who was supposed to come on the first night might not have come on the second night. So I do think that also even speaks to Italian culture as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And all the experience that I've had now with the my podcast actually is part of what led me to my full-time job now with the podcast guys, because what I'm doing is going beyond just getting that final product. Now I'm part of podcast development. I'm in
Yeah.
the room at the beginning of the conversation, and I'm working with these brands to figure out what the best concept is for them, what's going to get them to their goals. And that, of course, doesn't mean just large download numbers. That goal could be very different depending on the
Yeah.
client. But I actually get to have a hand in the beginning, and we can set the show up for that marketing success, whereas sometimes I run something called podcast audits. I'll take a look at shows that are finalized, and then people say, okay, go ahead and market this. And I say, okay, well, first off, we got to kind of go backwards now. And I run these
Yeah.
audits, and I take a look at their show art and their metadata and their keyword strategy, and, and all of it, and how it's showing up on the platforms. And I give recommendations on how we need to, change some things to optimize it for discoverability before we can even go out and make that marketing campaign, worth it. So
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I definitely have to just say, like, it's one of those, like, every word has a clapping emoji between it. Like, audience development begins in development. Like, I definitely think that's something to, yes, it's definitely something I want to just impose on the listener, right? For all of our audio nerd listeners, for every, like, audio geek that just is like, like shoulders deep into a DAW, like hunched over, just like really editing every microsecond, like really cares about sound design and like the art of narrative nonfiction, beautiful audio. Like, please also include your audience dev friends, because, like, we will help you be able to make more great work.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think production and marketing really go hand in hand. I had a great relationship with all of the producers that I've worked with at,
Hmm.
whether that was at Cumulus, whether that was with my podcast, whether that was with the various different agencies and clients I've worked with over here in different countries in Europe, whether it was in English or a different language. But having that relationship with the producer is very key in podcast success.
Absolutely. Well, Katrin, you're now at the podcast guys. And they're UK based. You're not. You're based in Milan, which is great. Um, but tell us a little bit about how you got into the podcasting industry because we're a young industry and everybody's journey is different.
Absolutely. So before I got into podcasting, I actually had a successful social media management business, and I had no interest in finding a full time job. I was growing my business, and I had a client who had referred me to this full time position as the audience development director at Cumulus Media. And I said, well, thanks, but no thanks. I'm not interested. I have my company. At the time, I was also living in a tiny house on wheels, traveling the country. I wasn't thinking about, kind of settling into a full time and also settling into a one location. And, I said, I don't want to close a door before I have a chance to explore what's behind that door. And so I went in for the interview and I got to meet the CMO and Carolyn Chauncey, who would then go on to become my manager, and John Wardock. And I fell in love with, the company, with the team. And I really liked listening to podcasts personally. And I thought, this could be really cool. I said, oh, all right, I'm going to do it. I took on the role, and that's was my foot in the door into specifically podcast audience development. I like to say when I talk about the social media company that I managed, really was an audience development company, if you will. It's just that the avenue we were taking was mainly social media, but with the audience development director position at Cumulus Media, broadening out to podcasts, also working with the radio station groups, and also continuing my work with social media. So that's where I got started. And then I was there for 3 years, absolutely loved it. And just for personal reasons, I decided to move to Italy and couldn't keep that job, with the move. In the end, it was actually kind of a blessing. At the beginning, I was a little nervous. I was moving to a country where I didn't speak the language. I didn't know where my career was going to go and how that was going to work out. But because of this move over to this side of the Atlantic, I've now had a chance to work in a lot of different podcast markets. And each of the markets are very, very different. The US is its own market. And then there's, and people, I hear a lot of people say the European market, but let me tell you, every country in Europe, their market is very different. The Spanish market is very different to the French market. It's very different to the Italian market, to the Belgium market. And I've worked in all these different markets now with different podcasts, also with the different cultural nuances, and then the fact that in some markets DAI wasn't a thing.
Hmm.
Now maybe it is more, but back 3 years ago it wasn't, and so
Yeah.
cross promotion wasn't a possibility. And having that experience has really helped me navigate all different types of circumstances. So I got my, foot in the door with Cumulus, this major company that had a lot of resource and had these very big podcasts. But now I've worked with, also other big podcasts, but also indie podcasts, podcasts with no budget, podcasts with some budget, podcasts that had particular goals of putting on live events. I just had a client that I've been working with since the beginning of the year. I worked with them for 6 months. I ended up pitching an idea to Spotify to have a first of its kind live event in the office and actually have people attend a recording of my client's podcast. My client's goal was actually to get the CEO of Bending Spoons onto the show. And per us doing this, we were able to go back to the CEO of Bending Spoons. She was able to and actually get them to answer her this time because she said, well, what if we did it live at Spotify? And of course, Spotify, the name caught the interest. And so we ended up doing this event. And then through that and that relationship and growing the show, now she was just on a New York City billboard because her podcast was the Italian podcast entered into the Radar campaign at Spotify Europe. So I think it's really just been such a journey, and I'm so grateful for all of it and all the experiences that I've had in working with all different podcasts and all different circumstances. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting, right? Like you definitely are someone who applies the knowledge that you gain from each experience to the next experience, and it's a real cumulative thing. It's very interesting to see, right? Because I think like you said, you had a social media company, you were having a wild life in terms of living nomadically in the US to, working with Cumulus, which is a juggernaut in podcasting, one of the larger companies, to, having your own business, helping indie podcasts. And when we talk about the European market, technically it is the size of the US bigger, but the language barrier is different for each country. And so each market is individual. A great example is Portugal, where Portugal's got a population of about 10 million, and you'd think, oh, maybe everyone in Brazil can listen. But actually, the
Different
Portuguese
type of
dialect,
Portuguese. Mhm.
absolutely, it's very difficult for Brazilian populations to understand the Portuguese accent, and dialect, and it's very easy for Portuguese to understand Brazilian. So Brazil's actually got the booming podcast market in terms of Portuguese. So it's very interesting the nuance between all the different languages in Europe and just the pockets. Italy has just a booming and emerging podcasting industry. So it's been very, very cool to see you here as well in that capacity. Um,
Thanks, Norma.
well, Katrin, what would you say is one key move or metric or even a mindset that's made the biggest impact on your podcasting career and the success of your clients' podcasts?
I would say the biggest mindset is actually just being passionate about the podcast industry because, following up with the industry, reading newsletters like Pod News or Sounds Profitable, or even just following up in different ways of what's going on in the industry has allowed me to keep up with the constant changes that are happening and then apply them to the work that I do for my clients so that they're never left behind. They always know what's happening because they're always getting the updates and the important updates, cutting out the noise. And what do they need to know? What's going to actually help them grow their show? What's going to help them monetize their show as we talk about, the
Hmm.
money in podcasting. So that mindset of actually caring about keeping up with the industry and having it come so naturally that, if I'm doing something on my own time and I'm scrolling in my emails and I'm reading through a newsletter that's teaching me more about what's going on about in the podcast industry, that's really helped my clients and the work that I do. You mentioned, a move that's been key to helping my clients and the work that I do. I think I talked a bit about this before, but definitely the move to start my own podcast. Even if this podcast, it's not going to be a call her daddy level, and I'm not even sure that that's really why I started it. It's more of a passion project, but it has taught me so much that I can step into the shoes of the podcaster's side of things. And so that has really helped me be able to service my clients and do the work that I do to an even better extent. Um, and then from I think you said metric perspective. So a key metric, I don't have one key metric, but rather I would say shying away from just looking at downloads. I think this is a
Yeah.
conversation in the industry that we have a lot is don't.
This is a big one. Yeah, we had Dan Meisner come on and talk about the death of the download.
That's a
It's a
great way
big
to put
one.
it. Yeah,
Yeah.
because that might not be your goal. If we really get granular and kind of like peel back the layers of the onion to get
Yeah.
to why are you doing this podcast? What is your goal of the show? As I just talked about Italian for sure, for me, not being about just getting it to a download level that I'm going to be getting the next deal with Netflix, although that would be nice. But it's about, for me, using it as a way to firstly just kind of have a passion project, but also to
Mhm.
learn more about this podcasting in different ways outside of marketing. So the goal for your podcast might be something else. You might not even realize what that is. We talk a lot about when we say to not look at just downloads, we talk about average consumption rate. So for example, if you have, just 100 downloads an episode and you are getting complete 100% completions to that, it's not no longer just 100 downloads per episode. That's 100 people that are listening to your show from start to finish that you have
Yeah.
engaged. And then that's, bringing us all the way back to the top of this interview is, well, what can you do with that audience? And if you are looking to make money from this, how can you monetize them? And maybe it's a large, a big ticket item, something that costs a lot so that if only one person buys, actually it's a lot of money. So, don't just look at downloads is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a lot of talk in the industry right now about, downloads being not necessarily a vanity metric, but not the be all end all, right? The amount of the episode that each person listens to is super important, right? You may get 100,000 downloads, but if they're only listening to the first 2 minutes of an hour long episode, Like, really? Did you get 100,000 downloads? Like, what is that worth? And I think that that's a really important distinction. You know, when we talk about podcasting as an industry and building your audience, it's not a quick fix. It's not an easy money. It's not a winning lotto ticket. It's putting in the hard yards of a medium that you love, telling stories or having conversations and sharing information that you love to create a sustainable community that will then, pay you back for what you've put into it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, Katrin, what's something that people don't know about what you do?
Ooh, I guess I can talk about the fact that, audience development, traditionally, in my experience, has been kind of steady in this doing the same things over and over, right? It's been, cross promotions and feed drop swaps
Yeah.
and guest swaps and all these things. But now in my career, I've built a few marketing departments at different companies, and it's what I'm actually doing at the podcast guys. I'm essentially building out a marketing department that really wasn't established there before. And now, there's a team also that I have at the company, and doing partly the development work, partly the building the marketing department work, partly marketing as it relates also to help with the sales and the podcast guys growing and working outside the box when it comes to audience development for some of our clients and not just doing those standard things that might not fit some of the clients that we have. For example, one of our clients has an internal only podcast, right? So how do we make sure that we still get people to listen to that podcast? And so one of the ideas I had is for them to do watch parties. So to get the employees together and to actually encourage them to watch the episodes and then have a discussion about them. And so coming up with outside the box audience development strategies. So I guess that could be something that people don't know is kind of where I am now in my career is beyond just the executional work of audience development and rather the broader scale, being able to build out a structure of a marketing department within a company that can handle the audience development of clients, but also the marketing of the company itself.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's what happens when you reach a certain point in your career, right? You go from, you know, being someone who is working independently to being someone who is managing a team and building teams and is within the larger dynamic of the company itself and its goals, right? So it's beyond the direct client work level and it's that step above of, okay, how does this fit into the overall company strategy? What's the team I'm building? How does that fit within the rest of the company? How does that fit within the company goals, within the client goals, all of that? Absolutely. It's a really fun moment, I think, when you can make that switch from, you know, almost employee to manager because you're still overseeing the work, but sometimes you're not as hands on. And some people don't want to be hands off, right? They want to be in the trenches, in with the clients at all times. They want to be editing microseconds. They want to be in the field with a microphone. And other people are like, hey, I see this top down strategy. I want to be able to help you build this company. I want to be able to help, our clients strategize 6 months, 2 years, 5 years out. So I definitely think that's a fun transition. And it's been nice to see you on this journey as well.
Thank you. And it's interesting. I love all the days of that I was more in the trenches and doing all the executionary work.
Yeah, of
Because
course.
something that I actually had a discussion with someone recently, and they said, "Well, I know audience development for podcasts and PR really well, but actually I don't know how to execute it because they hadn't actually executed." And I think that this is where the benefit of doing, independent work or smaller agency work along with the big company work comes in handy, because if you've only ever worked for the big, companies, and let's say even like you've only ever worked for the Spotifys or the Amazons, there's nothing bad about that, but maybe you haven't had the experience of what is it like when you don't have resources? What is it like when you have to figure it out without budget, or
Yeah.
you don't
How
have a
do you get
team behind
scrappy?
you? How do you
Yeah,
get
I
scrappy?
think
How do you make it work? So I'm really grateful
absolutely.
for all the experience I've had in those moments that allowed me
Yeah,
now to be being able to look kind of top down at the whole picture and kind of build that out.
absolutely. And I think, there's podcasting is interesting as an industry because it runs the gamut, right? You've got people who are a one man band who create and market podcasts for people. You've got very large agencies that have departments. You've got juggernauts, right? Like iHeart, Spotify. And so it's definitely something where you see a lot of different kinds of careers and skill sets. and a lot of different kind of experience. And people who have experience that kind of runs the gamut across that are more adaptive to whatever your client needs, right? Like you were saying, sometimes, you're performing a podcast audit, the podcast is launched, it's out there, and you're like, okay, what does the cover art look like? Is it relaying the message and the tone of the show before the listener even is able to hear it?
Does it have
How
a
are we
microphone on it?
Right. Oh God, this is one of the biggest things. I think Errol Nissenblatt just posted about this.
She
Like,
did on LinkedIn. I did see that.
yes.
It
Oh
comes
my
up
God, it
all
was
the
so
time in branded
classic.
podcasting.
It comes up all the time, which is fine. It's great, have a
No
microphone in
shade,
there. There's
but
no shade to the mic. I prefer if it's an actual photo of a mic and the host versus like a mic
a
emoji.
Canva or a Canva stock image.
Oh, a Canva stock mic. What a vibe. Oh, man. No, if you have a mic in there, it's important to assess what the mic's purpose really is. I also think that you always want to think about things from the audience perspective. It's not about you. And it's hard, right? Because if it's your brand or your podcast, you really are thinking, oh, this is an expression of me, especially on the indie side. There's a lot of personal ownership. And you have to get out of your own way and say, like, what do people actually want to hear from me about
Yes.
this?
Or
Right. And there's,
does a picture of myself really tell them what the show
ah,
is about? Or is it better if I use a graphic that relays the value that they're going to find within the show?
yeah, you kind of have to like let your ego die a little bit there. And that's hard. That's hard across teams and brands. That's hard on an indie level. So I definitely think it's something where it's just an important consideration. Like your podcast is not about you. You're the talent.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, Catrin, you've done a lot of really cool stuff, but now you're with the podcast guys and you guys do a lot of really cool work at the podcast guys. So tell us a little bit about what you've been most excited in terms of projects and some of the kinds of work you've gotten to do because now you've come from the US, then you're based in Italy, and now you're working with a UK team. So I have some clients in the UK as well, and it's a really fun jump. So what's it been like to work for a larger UK organization and work on podcasts, sometimes specifically for the UK market, but also with a team in London?
It's been really great. And I've had the opportunity to travel to London quite a few times, very often actually. Just was there last month, because it's really easy with the airport that I have near me, Linate. If you're in Milan, the small airport, it's wonderful to get around to the different European countries. But it's been really great. Something specific about the podcast guys, and I love expanding my experience, is that their unique value proposition is that they offer recordings at live events. And so while it's a UK based company, we're quite global. Our team was just in Abu Dhabi and where were we? Barbados recently. Of course, all across the US in different states, all across different major cities in Europe. And actually going with our clients on site to their largest conferences of the year, setting up podcast equipment and actually being able to record episodes or side interviews. I was actually at one of these events recently where it was a panel event for one of our clients that they actually were prospecting new clients for their own business. And we set up kind of this interview style um, area where people could come and talk about why they loved the client, because they had some people there that actually were already clients. So why they loved our clients. So I know it's confusing, though. Our clients were talking about why they love them so much, and we were able to put together that highlight reel. Really fast turnover. We'll do a 24-hour turnover. We also have employees around the world, also on different time zones, which really helps. So we have someone even, for example, in Australia. So while we're sleeping, they're getting editing done, and by the time we wake up, it's all done and complete. So some of the live podcasting stuff has been really interesting for me to work on.
Katrin, if you had to start over today, what would you do differently to grow faster or smarter?
Well, if you heard our conference panel at Podcast Movement Evolutions that Norma and I were on, listeners, I talked a lot about consistency. And this comes up a lot in my audience development work and the audits that I do, about finding a consistent schedule that works for you. So there's no right answer if your podcast is daily or weekly or 5 minutes or 30 minutes or whatever it might be. But it's about letting your listeners know when they can expect new content to come out and
Yes.
have that be really steady and consistent. So,
Yes.
I also understand though, and this is where it's really great to have, stood in the podcaster's shoes, of my, thinking about my clients is sometimes it's really hard to stay consistent or it's hard to be an always on podcast if you have other things going on in your life and a full-time job and XYZ, or like me, you're learning Italian and you're trying to do a million other things. Or if any of you listeners are foreigners, living abroad in a different country, that in itself is a full-time job and will forever be, especially if you're an American living somewhere else. So there's so much going on in my personal life plus work. And then of course this podcast that I ended up having to do what I'm calling seasons. And if I'm really transparent about that, that wasn't the plan. The plan was to be an always on show, but it just wasn't sustainable. I couldn't continue. And I thought it would be better to stop and call it the end of season 1 rather than have episodes come out inconsistently. So I was able to close out being consistent with that season 1. And now when I launch season 2, again, being able to have episodes in the can so that I can go out consistently and people know exactly when the new episodes are out. So I'll give that advice to myself. I'll give it to everyone else out there. Pick a schedule that you can be consistent with, so that, and also so that you don't hit pod fade, so that it's not too much. Pick a
Oh,
schedule that
pod
works
fade.
for you. Yeah, it's a real thing.
It's a real thing. And I have to say, there is a subconscious psychological element that we are referring to. When you are consistent, people know when your podcast is coming out, so they subconsciously trust you more. They rely on you. Hey, I know once Catrin's new season comes out, it's going to be every Tuesday. It's going to be this long. It's going to have a guest. It's going to be an interview. I'm going to learn about Italy. And so I do think that having that consistency, I talk about this all the time with my clients in development. When we are talking about what your show is, please do not mix it up on the listener. It's like going to a restaurant, ordering something, and then having them come out and be like, oh, but like today we just felt like making it like different. No.
Well, if you live in Italy, that might happen, but
No,
no,
I
I'm
don't
just
think
kidding.
so. You have to know where to go. If you're going to
Absolutely.
Italy, ask one of us where to eat because
Exactly.
it's hit or miss actually, but that's a different conversation.
No, they
I
take
do,
food too seriously. But if you look on Google Maps and a store says they're open for certain hours and you go there and there's a
but they're not going
Post-it
to
note.
change what you order.
No,
Sometimes
they
they'll
won't
tell you
change what
don't
you
order
order.
that. They won't.
No, I'm just
Sometimes they'll
making
tell you
jokes.
like, hey, this is better tonight. Get this, or don't order that, or you won't like this. Like they have opinions for
Yeah.
sure. But
Or
if you
they
order
let you know when they don't have something, but they let you know in advance. And this is another thing we can kind of give the metaphor back to podcasting is I say, if you aren't able to come out with an episode on a day that you said that you would,
tell people.
tell people.
Tell
There are
people.
ways around it. You can announce it on the episode before that due to XYZ circumstances, you can make it up if you don't want to tell the truth. A new episode won't be able to be released.
Pop a 1-minute trailer in your feed. Hey guys, I just want to let you know, like, I do not have bandwidth this week. Like, I used to listen to Strangers by Leah Tao like a million years ago. I was obsessed with it. And shout out Leah Tao and Strangers. And I remember listening to her show and her having these little vignettes of like, hey guys, I know I said every 2 weeks, but it's just not happening. And I just wanted to let you know that. And I think it also includes the audience in that conversation, right? It isn't a one-way, it's a two-way.
Yeah.
It's saying, hey, I
It
appreciate
is.
you being here every, bat time, every bat channel, right? And I just want to let you know, like, here's what's going on for me. And I think when you
Or
don't
put up
give,
a back catalog or do a feed drop swap, but just have
if
something
you
there.
don't give your audience the courtesy of communicating with them,
True. Put the
they're
1
not
minute
gonna
at the
give-
beginning, even if you're doing the feed drop swap, for
Yeah.
example. Mhm.
Absolutely. I mean, tell people what's going on. We're all human, right? We're all just like trying to figure this out. Everybody's just trying to spiritually walk each other home. Right. And so I think it's one of those things where when you don't give your audience the courtesy of it, or you're too in your own head about it. I've had a lot of creators, with the burnout and the pressure, right? Like with you were saying was about what you were saying with season 1, right? Is it better to burn out or fade away? Right. I think pod fade is very real, and podcasting is a very real medium. Producing, recording, editing, pre-producing, getting the visuals right, getting the audio right, making sure your guest sounds right, doing the promotion, all for one person for their own show. If we're talking about an indie show, even for a brand, multiple people doing that. It's a lot of work. Give yourself credit and give your audience the grace to come on that journey with you. I think that that's a really important distinction as well. Great advice. Yeah. Well, Catrin, what are you most excited about in the podcasting industry right now? Because we are ever evolving.
This is so true. This is a great question for today specifically because, we all just learned about Sounds Profitable bringing podcast movement to South by Southwest.
Yeah.
And something specific that I love about that, and, we're recording this on November 13th. So for whenever this comes out, for context there, the fact that the event, that podcast movement part of South by Southwest is not involving a ticket, that makes me really excited. The accessibility of that event makes me really excited because something that has been a bit worrisome and conversations I've had with other industry people. I was just having a conversation with the Italian lead at Amazon here over coffee the other day. And we were talking about how video podcasting has created a little bit of a barrier for people to be able to start podcasts now. People who are a little bit more intimidated about, or they don't have the budget to get a camera or whatever it might be.
Oh my God. We absolutely talked about this. Todd Cochran, who sadly passed away, we had pre-recorded an episode with him earlier in the summer, and then he very suddenly passed away, and we rushed to put this episode out. It was quite stressful and also just awful. And he talked about this a lot, how you don't have to have video and don't let video scare you. If you want to make an audio podcast, make an audio podcast.
Absolutely. And now, if you're following the industry and you see these big deals with the, TV networks and the
Netflix
and then it seems really intimidating because now all of a sudden where podcasting was a medium that nearly anyone could get into and kind of start. And now it's a medium that's like how you look at watch a movie and, becoming a successful celebrity actor, for example, seems like so far away. So I just want to make sure that podcasting remains accessible, that, people know that they can join the community and start a podcast. So that's why this news about the podcast movement at South by Southwest by Sounds Profitable being without, not having a ticket involved is really exciting to me, the accessibility of it.
Absolutely. And shout out to Brian Barletta, who was one of our early episodes here on PodBiz. So that was before they announced the merger. So very, very exciting times. I think it'll be really fun to see how podcasting evolves as a community in that way as well.
Definitely.
Well, Catrin Skaperdas, Marketing and Audience Development Director for the Podcast Guys, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me, Norma. It's been a pleasure.